Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, you might think they're broskies. Xi even gave his best friend a friendship medal. In 2022, they issued a joint statement. Friendship between the two states has no limits. There are no forbidden areas of cooperation. That was right before Russia invaded Ukraine, which China asked Russia to delay until after they were done hosting the Winter Olympics. Since, just about anything will take away ratings from the Winter Olympics, including our Watching Paint Dry Facebook group. After the invasion, Putin and Xi have continued their friendship. Chinese companies have been sending Russia weapons of war. And as much as possible, China is providing diplomatic cover to Russia. And China is getting a lot out of the deal. Because of all the sanctions on Russia, Putin is desperate to sell Russian energy to China. So China has been getting $88 billion worth of discounted Russian energy imports. In fact, a lot of trade between the two countries is now being done in Chinese yuan. China wants to undercut the dollar as the main currency of trade. So this has been a huge win. And yet, despite all the support China is giving to Russia, China's position globally has only improved. The US and allies are looking to China to help end the Ukraine war. Russia wants Xi, America wants Xi, Zelensky wants Xi. This is the ideal male body. You may not like it, but this is what peak performance looks like. So things seem to be going great between Putin and Xi. But if Putin knows anything about history, and he should as former KGB, he should be very worried. Because all this has happened before, and communist China can be a very fickle friend. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. So right now, Russia and China seem very close, but that doesn't mean things can't turn on a dime. The former Soviet Union and Mao Zedong were also very close, for a time. But then in March 1969, there was a deadly border clash, one that almost brought the world's two biggest communist countries to the brink of war. It was called the Sino-Soviet border conflict, and the Kremlin hinted they'd be willing to use nukes against China. Mao, being the class act he was, said, "You piss on my head, I shall retaliate." Suddenly, the ironclad alliance between the Soviet Union and China seemed like it was crumbling. That's when Nixon and Kissinger stepped in, thinking they could exploit the divide. But in the end, they ended up getting played. The Chinese Communist Party does not value alliances. It only cares about advancing its own interests. After years of ruthlessly denouncing the West, Mao began calling Nixon the #1 good fellow in the world. Quite the turn. Of course, Xi Jinping considers Putin his #1 good fellow, and that certainly will never change at the drop of a hat. As a top Soviet foreign ministry official said in 1982, the Chinese never befriend anyone for a long time. Certainly, the newfound friendship between China and the US didn't last. In fact, in 1975, a senior Chinese foreign policy official explained Mao's decision to meet with Nixon to other party officials. "We allowed Nixon's visit not in the slightest due to positive feelings towards the US. We are taking advantage of the Soviet-US conflict." Over the coming decades, China would siphon off American jobs, technology, intellectual property, growing in power while weakening the US. And when the US started to wise up, China and Russia became best friends again. And just like the US, Putin has made a fatal mistake. He essentially allowed Russia to become a vassal state of China. With the Ukraine war, Russia has burned every bridge it had with the West. It is wholly dependent on China. China's not dependent on Russia, and it certainly doesn't need Putin. There are already signs the no-limits friendship between Xi and Putin is coming to an end. China is struggling to feed its massive population. They were incredibly dependent on grain shipments from Ukraine, and that's been disrupted by the war. And Xi knows the same sanctions the West is using against Russia could be turned on China. That's why China has been passing laws to get around foreign sanctions. And after the recent Wagner revolt last month, Putin's position doesn't seem as secure as it once did. What happens if Russian elites turn on Putin? Will Xi be there to back him? What happens if the West starts putting more pressure on China to abandon Russia? I guess at the end of the day, at least Putin has a medal. And China Uncensored would not exist without support from viewers like you. Frequent demonetization and age restriction by YouTube would have run us out of business. Most of our budget comes from fan support on the crowdfunding website Patreon. That's patreon.com/China Uncensored. If you support the show with even as little as $1 an episode, you'll get a bunch of cool perks, including the chance to have me answer your questions on the show. And today's question comes from just some guy. For all the people calling for a boycott of China, I don't think a boycott will work. The more we decouple our systems, the sooner we'll go to war. We need to find a legitimate path to China moderating. Otherwise, humanity will keep repeating this same nightmarish mistake over and over again. Now that's an interesting point. But remember, ahead of World War I and World War II, global economies were deeply intertwined, and it didn't prevent war. During the Cold War, global economies were essentially divided into the First World, democratic countries, and the Second World, those under the sway of the Soviet Union. And we didn't go to war. The biggest difference was nuclear annihilation. We couldn't go to war anymore because any conventional war between the US and Soviet Union would become a nuclear war. And that would be equally devastating to both sides. Though later on there was some economic interaction between the US and Soviet Union, like the time Gorbachev was in a Pizza Hut commercial. Ultimately, the Soviet system bankrupted itself. And that's what would have happened in China were it not for the constant influx of foreign capital, particularly from the US. And if you look at China's economy today, even that isn't working anymore. War requires money, and if China doesn't have it, I think we'll be good. Thanks for your question and your longtime support, Just Some Guy. You know, you're not just some guy to me. Thank you for watching. Once again, check out patreon.com/China Uncensored for how you can support the show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.